Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Big Questions, Small Steps. My name is Amanda, and I am so grateful that you joined me today. Today is a very personal episode for me. As I've stated multiple times, I have grown up in the Christian denomination of United Church of Christ for over 40 years. And in that time, I had doubts, and I really basically searched for answers. And today's video is really going to illustrate my process growing up that led to these doubts. Now, I want to start by saying my family is amazing. By no means am I throwing them under the bus that they did something wrong, or if such and such would have happened, everything would have been perfect. No, this is just my life story. I am grateful for my family raising me and bringing me up with the traditions and the values that they did. And this is just my journey. So, if you're ready, let's hit the intro and we'll begin. So I have been blessed or grateful or whatever you want to say, to have been born and raised in a small town in Wisconsin, really kind of in the middle of nowhere. And I have been born into a very close, immediate family situation. And I have very large extended families on both sides for myself. And the small town that I was born in and grew up in is very religious in nature. There's a running joke that you'll know you've left this town when there's not a church or a bar on the block. That's what we have in our small town. We have numerous churches and just as many, if not more, bars. Chalk it up to whatever you will, but that's what life was like here. Being part of a religious community was just expected. At the public schools, we would frequently sing Christmas songs like hymns during school programs. We would have celebrations and acknowledge the Christian holidays only. That's just commonplace where I grew up. Also commonplace was just the general family expectation. There wasn't a question growing up that you were going to get married in a church. If you had children, they were going to be baptized. Now, there was a little bit of discussion, if you want to say, amongst my extended families about what denomination. We have some that are Lutheran, we have some that are Methodist, we have some that are United Church of Christ. But basically, their thought was as long as you were Christian, that was just common practice and that was the expectation. It was expected that everybody's children, after they were baptized, they were going to be confirmed. It was expected. So that's the mindset that I had growing up. Like they didn't question why they did different things. It's just this was the expectation and that's what they followed through with. They didn't question why are we celebrating this holiday. They just did. They continued on with their path, their expectation of this is what it is because that was family tradition as well. So I remember particularly growing up, confirmations were a big deal. Weddings were huge deals. Baptisms were big deals. A lot of things that centered around church life were big deals, but not as much in that it was a big or momentous occasion for that individual. It was more of a momentous occasion as far as a milestone or a mark, reflecting on the family and how it made them look. Having our very large extended families present for weddings or confirmations or baptisms, it was something that was considered a great honor. When my grandma and grandpa had their anniversary, for example, the biggest honor was that all of the grandkids came and sang during the service. All of the kids and grandkids came and sat. We took up almost half the church, but we came for their anniversary. The church was kind of the center point for many family activities growing up, because that's just what you do. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that as a family unit we talked about religion frequently or had religious discussions or even really entertained religious discussions. I would say that my family stated they were Christian and very actively Christian, but they didn't necessarily carry it into the home. They would, if we had large family gatherings, we would have prayers said before any meal, but not necessarily any special prayer. The one that my extended families and my immediate family tended to like was the "Come Lord Jesus, be our guest, let these gifts to us be blessed, amen." That's what they said. That was just commonplace. When my sister, both of my sisters, when they brought their now husbands home for the first time, one of the men was Catholic and he wasn't really observant in their family, so they didn't really know what was going on, but he kind of held his hands and sat through the prayer and never really said anything. The other one was Lutheran, and he knew a slightly different version of that prayer, but it was just commonplace, common expectation that that's what they did. I do remember as I grew older, my mom tried to do a new tradition of at Christmas, she would make a birthday cake for Jesus. So we would all remember the reason that we were having Christmas. That only lasted about 1 or 2 years. And she said she did that because her mom used to do it occasionally growing up. So they would have little things, little traditions built into the family. It pretty much was different ways for the family to get together. And whenever there was a holiday, then the family would get together. I remember particularly the Christmas celebration at my grandparents' house, and typically I'm remembering one side more than the other, just because one side got together more than the other for family, for big holidays like that. Again, they're both quite large sides of the family. But on one side, I remember that we would come and we would bring gifts for 1 or 2 other people that were in the family, and we would exchange them, and we would say thank you, and we would see the Christmas tree that my grandparents had decorated, and typically we would receive an ornament with our name on it, or for me it was a version of my name because my grandparents never called me by my name. They would call me by Mandy instead. So they would give us an ornament in hopes that we would transfer that ornament to our tree at home eventually when we got old enough to have our own tree. But they never really talked about their beliefs or their faith or what they questioned or anything like that. Now I do know, since all of my grandparents are passed, at each of their funerals, it's interesting that each of their funerals, someone making the eulogy or a pastor or whatever would make a comment about how faithful they were, or how religious they were, and how proud of their family they were, and what a religious individual they were. But that didn't necessarily like, they didn't talk about the Bible, they didn't talk about Jesus. They were much more they were trying to be what they felt was Christ-like in their life. They were trying to do what they believe was expected of them in the Bible. So they would help other people when they could. They would hire people to come do small jobs around the house. They lived on a farm, just in case you're wondering. So they would sometimes hire people to come help milk the cows, or they would sometimes hire people to come help work the land, or things like that. But it wasn't always the same people, and they were always trying to help anybody who needed it. Building that connection, helping people feel seen. And a big thing they kept stressing was using the gifts that you were granted for a greater good. So in addition to making the family look good, because that was definitely important and appearances mattered greatly, and if you ever stepped out of line, like that was a big thing that was frequently talked about, of parents frequently saying, or aunts and uncles or your grandparents saying, well, how do you think your actions made me look? That's just what they were focused on. They were very big on appearances. They were very big on being viewed by others as this good, strong Christian, not Christian as much, good, strong, high valued family. Okay. They were very big and focused on that. They wanted to be seen as people that could be relied upon in the community. And so I tell you all this not to be like, woe is me, because certainly not woe is me. I've had great experiences, most certainly, but to help you understand a little bit of where I was coming from. In growing up, it was expected. We had family get-togethers for Christmas. We had family get-togethers for Easter. There were huge Easter egg hunts, and it was always comical because at one side of my family we had ice cream buckets, and there were so many grandkids that my grandparents would hide them outdoors. Regardless of the weather, they were hidden outdoors because A, it got the kids out of the house, and B, there wasn't physically enough places to hide all the baskets inside the house. So certainly being in Wisconsin, food was a big focus whenever we had a family get together, and typically it was some kind of Christian holiday that we were getting together for. So Christmas and Easter were the big ones for my family. On the other side of my family, we got together a couple of times for birthdays, but it tended to be more of like portions of the family, because again, it was just a really large family, and it was tough to get everybody together at all the time. And one side of my family is quite close in age and geographically, and the other side of my family is more widespread as far as ages of uncles and aunts, as well as any of my cousins. So it was different between the two. On one side, I was the second oldest of the grandkids. On the other side, I don't even have a clue where I ranked in the elder population, but I'm guessing I was towards the bottom, probably middle to bottom for the other side. And so we didn't get together as much as a group, but we certainly would get together occasionally. So like, on the side that didn't get together as frequently, my mom and some of her sisters would get together and we would do certain things with the kids and the sisters. So we would go trick-or-treating for Halloween. We would go on a girls' shopping trip and we would take pictures with Santa. We would, at the mall, we would just do different things to kind of have that closeness. My uncles were all really big into cars and racing stock cars. So we would go and support them for that. We would go to parades. We would go and do different things in smaller groups. The one big thing that we had on that side of my family was they always made a big deal celebrating my grandparents' birthdays. I can still remember that at my grandpa's birthday, we would either play baseball or kickball, and he was the pitcher. That's just how it was. Family was very important to them, but equally as important was that unit that binds them together, and that was that appearance and that religion. So that's my extended family. My individual family, I grew up being baptized, watching my sister get baptized, being in Sunday school, going to church every Sunday, unless you were sick. If you were too sick to go to church, like, you didn't get to do anything for the rest of the day, and you better be pretty darn sick in order to skip church. It was very important to have all the girls there to make their appearance. We were active in the church growing up. We were part of a children's choir. We would have roles and plays that were put on. We were part of Sunday school, certainly. My parents were active in the church. They were a part of the leadership of the church. They taught Sunday school. One was a Sunday school superintendent, kind of like a principal for the Sunday school. Church was a big deal. It was something that they did, and they took pride in being able to help in some way. Being able to say, I can make a difference here. I can use my talents here. That was a big deal. And there was many a times as I had not nephews and nieces, as I had cousins that were born, I could see the honor in my parents' faces when they were selected to be the godparents for individual children. It was like a special honor that you gave to a brother or a sister. You matter. I see value in the way you're living your life, and I would like my children to learn from you. That was a huge honor, and one that my parents took quite seriously. It was a big deal. So I knew growing up that if I ever got to be a godparent, it was going to be a big deal. It just was. So all these different activities. I remember going to Sunday school. I remember having questions, and we were given these little flyers, kind of like giving a summary of the story of the day that you were supposed to take home and show it to your parents, and they were supposed to know something or show your craft or tell the story to them. And did I always get the stories right? No, not at all. But I got the gist. And I don't recall, and perhaps that memory just doesn't stick out as much, but I don't recall many conversations about what I learned or what we were talking about, really. And we typically went to Sunday school for about 45 minutes to an hour where you were in a room with a teacher, just like regular school, but on Sunday. And then you would be dismissed to go find your parents. And then you would sit in service for 45 minutes to an hour. And then church was done. And it was, okay, what's next? I remember having stories in my Sunday school that didn't make sense and almost worried me. I remember one in particular when I was in 3rd grade, and we were talking about to the minute detail of how God cares about you. And the teacher was really trying to drive home about how God knows how many hairs are on your head and your thoughts even before you think them. So, like, watch yourself at every turn. And I asked, like, okay, I get him caring, but really there's nothing more pressing than to count how many hairs are on my head? That seemed a bit minuscule for God to be worrying about. It seemed strange to me. It seemed odd. It seemed questionable. I grew up knowing most of the stories were going to be about Jesus. And by most, I mean about 85-90% of the stories that we focused on in Sunday school were about Jesus, about the miracles of Jesus, Jesus's birth, the disciples that he called, like what he did, his death, his resurrection. That's what we focused on, because Jesus was supposed to be what you were supposed to be like. You were supposed to be Jesus-like in the world. That's how you were a good Christian. So some things stayed, and it was this constant question. If you asked a question, my church was very big into the idea that, well, some churches don't allow you to ask questions, but we here at this church, we welcome questions. And they did, kind of. They were okay with you asking a question. However, me being a questioning kind of person, I quickly learned that they were okay with questions as long as you didn't ask them repeatedly, and it was a pretty surface level question. If you went deeper than surface level, as a young child, I remember getting the response, well, don't worry about that. You're thinking too hard. If you just prayed about it more, if you just had more faith, then this would all make sense to you. I'm not sure about you, but to me, that equates to if somebody's mad and you tell them calm down. Very rarely does that help. Very rarely. I would not suggest, if you have a partner and they're upset about something, don't say just calm down. That rarely helps the situation. And it certainly didn't help me growing up. When I was in Sunday school and I would ask these questions, I felt stifled. I felt dismissed. I felt like there was something wrong with me. Because if I just prayed harder, if I just had more faith, if I just was something, then God would see value enough in me to help me understand. And so it turned into this whole self-doubt kind of thing. And that, coupled with that appearances mattered more than anything, essentially, is the feeling I got. that led to a lot of fakeness in how I would conduct myself. I would do things just to live up to that impression that people had of me. I would do things in hope that it would click. That I would, through my actions, do enough to gain the favor, to gain the knowledge. Did that work? No, it did not. I don't recommend other people doing that. The idea of fake it till you make it in religion didn't work for me. Going through the motions and having questions and kind of bottling them up inside didn't work for me in the end. But we're not there quite yet. So as I went through, I was in Sunday school. Then as I was in my confirmation period, I was asking more questions. And I had questions with our pastor. And he had been the pastor since my birth. And, well, not since my birth, because I had a different pastor baptize me. But from my earliest memories, that pastor, the pastor that confirmed me, was the pastor that I had experienced. I had great respect for him. He was a very wise man. He intimidated the heck out of me, just because I had so much respect for him. But he too was one that if I asked questions, anything beyond surface level, or asked it more than once, I would get that same response. And I remember him telling me frequently, "You're just thinking too hard. This isn't for you to worry about. If you just had more faith, if you just prayed about it more, then maybe you would understand." I remember going through confirmation class, and I was in a group of, oh goodness, probably 12, 15, something like that. It was a pretty big confirmation class. And there were kids who were, in my views, more religious, more active. They had more knowledge. When they spoke or answered questions, they seemed to have much more depth, a much deeper understanding than I did. And I remember my last year of confirmation, we had it for 2 years. The last year of confirmation, there was somebody who transferred in, and she just blew me away with how much she knew. And she was always speaking in these ways that seemed far above where we were age-wise. And so one of the things that you do right before you're confirmed is you have to give your statement of faith. Where basically in our church, we had to stand up and say, "This is what I believe. This is my understandings. I want to become part of this church." And this person who was so eloquent in her speech was right before me. I cannot tell you how badly I just wanted to stand up and go, "Ditto," and go sit back down. But I couldn't, certainly. But it was just one of those things where I was constantly comparing myself to others, and, well, they have this, but I don't have this, and they're getting this and I'm not getting this, and why is this bothering me so much? It's not bothering this person. And it was just questioning upon questioning and feeling like I was never good enough. So then I tried to take, after I was confirmed, I tried to take more leadership roles, thinking, okay, well, maybe if I step into this leadership role, again, something will click. I helped with a vacation Bible school. It's typically a week during the summer where when the kids are off of school, they come, they play games, we have snacks, they learn a Bible story. It's basically a week of free daycare for half a day. So I'd help with Vacation Bible School. I taught Sunday school. I helped lead Sunday school as far as the organization and the superintendent. I did it all at the beginning to A, find my place. B, certainly I wanted to continue that idea of my actions make other people look good. I remember my mom and my dad both had stated how they had received comments on how nice it was that their daughter is the one that continued on this. Oh, how nice that she's helping. Oh, you must be so proud that you raised a daughter that did this. And it was that pride in my parents that made me want to keep doing it. That pride that my parents showed, that I was finally good enough, I was worth it. And not that my parents ever said I wasn't good enough. It was something that I had self-imposed. But it was just another one of those things like, okay, well, maybe if I fake it enough, I'll figure it out. I like helping people. I enjoy helping people, whether it's making them feel seen, doing a project, entertaining kids so adults can focus. Like, I enjoyed helping people. And quite honestly, I was not getting much of anything out of the worship services themselves. So if I was helping in Sunday school, well, I didn't have to go to church service. And the questions that the kids asked, or the projects that we were doing, the creativity of trying to find a way to make this story understandable, this concept understandable, the miracles of Jesus, and trying to help them understand the miracle that you can't even comprehend in a craft or in the, like, understanding certain parts. I enjoyed that challenge. I enjoyed seeing the kids have fun when we would talk about the story of the person who was paralyzed and his friends lifted him onto the roof and lowered him down right to the feet of Jesus. I enjoyed working with the kids and like doing different activities to help them understand how helpless it would feel to not be able to walk, to not be able to see, how grateful you are when you can see again. And I remember working particularly on the Easter story, because I taught kindergarten for the longest time. And quite frankly, I hated teaching the Easter story, because without a doubt, a grandparent or somebody close to this child or a animal would have recently died, and I now have to do the Easter story where Jesus dies and he's raised again. And then I, as a 18-year-old, 25-year-old, have to tell this child, this 4 or 5-year-old child, why Jesus came back alive, but your Grandma Sue is not. Ugh. I hated teaching the Easter story. Hated it. It was not my favorite by any means, but I enjoyed helping others. Now, when I was teaching Vacation Bible School and Sunday school, I was still struggling with different concepts in the stories. I would certainly still teach the story because I knew what the curriculum, what the tradition, what the denomination told me I was supposed to say about different things. And I also knew what I understood. So sometimes, depending on what I was teaching, I could weave some of that in. Sometimes I could not. But it did surprise me for the people who are the leaders and are supposed to be like the biggest people to follow. Like they're supposed to have the greatest actions, the greatest compassion, the most Christ-like. I was surprised and sorely disheartened when I saw how much judgment there was about people. There would be tons of people talking about people behind their backs. And yes, I know that that's kind of happenstance in society. People will talk about you behind your back. But this happened in church. In church. Like I'm talking about teachers talking about parent situations or parenting. I'm talking about other teachers, other clergy or staff people talking about members in very disheartening and dismissive ways. It was shocking because I wasn't anticipating that. I know I'm not foolish. I know that people talk about people behind their backs. Absolutely. But I expected less of that in the church. And I certainly didn't expect it to be so common and so visual, especially from the leadership. Seeing the way they talked about other people bothered me. In high school, I taught at the grocery store. And we always used to joke that working on Sundays was the worst because a Christian will go to service in the morning and then come go grocery shopping, and they are the worst. Their patience is null. They're rude. They're dismissive. They're demanding. Like all of their goodness was used up in church. And it was so disheartening, so jarring to the system that you had to laugh about it because what else were you going to do? I saw, and sadly enough, I did myself when I was in the leadership role of Sunday school. There's a ton of manipulation of people saying, oh, well, God put your name on my heart and I just thought maybe you should do this position, or oh, if only somebody would come forward and help this group of people really want to do this, but we need somebody to step forward. And there was that tug and pull. It was a ton of manipulation. And that's just at my church. There are multiple other organizations that I know about where there will be a pastor that comes up and says, okay, lock the doors. We need to have more money to give to this family who's in need. Giving them $300 isn't enough. We need at least $2,000. You need to reach in and deal this $2,000 before we can open the doors. I've heard stories of that. I've seen worship spaces like that. It happens. They get it done. Now, whether that strategy is to kind of put more pressure on people, I'm not sure. But the level of manipulation that I've seen, I didn't care for. So after a while of working with Sunday school, working with the Vacation Bible School, I quite honestly felt like I was getting used. When people would see me coming into church, they would have a job for me at all times. It wasn't just, oh, it's good to see you. It's, oh, it's good to see you. I was hoping you would do this. And I was always happy to help. I would do bulletin boards. I would paint Sunday school rooms. I would do whatever was needed. But it came to a point where it felt like I was being used or expected to do everything because nobody else would, or because nobody else would do it right, or because I just know so much. I started to get very I started to get very resentful. I enjoyed helping, but I would do music for the Sunday school classes frequently. And so then I would both worship services, because we had 2 worship services and we had Sunday school that ran both services. So both services, I would do the music program for the kids. Did I ever go to worship? Only when the kids sang. And I felt like I was taking on so much that the use of my gifts, my ability to lead, my musical instincts, my teaching abilities, I felt like I was being taken advantage of. And I felt farther and farther away from the reason that you're supposed to go to church in the first place. So eventually, I was a Sunday school teacher for 25 years. And I know 25 years is a long time. 25 years I was a Sunday school teacher, and then I stopped. And I said, okay, I'm going to go, and I'm going to find a different way. God is leading me in a different path, because I was not happy to come to Sunday school anymore. I was irritated. Putting on the Christmas program is a lot of work. And I would get stressed out, and I felt like nobody else would help, and it was all on me. It was a lot of me stuff that was going on, because I felt so disconnected with everything. I felt so disconnected from God. I felt so disconnected from Jesus. I would find songs or stories, and I would try to look for the positive. What life lesson can we take out of this? But after a while, it felt like I was being used. It felt like I was losing all the joy that I once had. And it wasn't about the appearance anymore. So I decided to step back from the Sunday school, and I started using my talents in a different way. I joined a church choir, and I enjoyed that because I enjoy singing. I come from a very musical family. And I enjoyed just being able to work at a different, I enjoyed being able to serve in a different capacity within the service. So I would go and sing with the choir, and we would be in service. Now, did I take anything necessarily out of the services? Not particularly. When I was in the services, typically it was the music that I would latch onto most. Whether it was a song line or a meeting, that's what I really linked onto. The songs are what carried me through to the next week. And I enjoyed that. Now, I also, after being in just the choir for a while, I was asked to come and teach the confirmation program. So the older kids, asking them harder questions. My first year, I taught the New Testament, which, we didn't spend much of any time on. So that was a nice challenge for me to learn a little bit more about the Old Testament and the different stories in there, trying to understand, and then trying to, at the same time, it literally was a video series that I was supposed to do through the year. Like, it was just watch one video after another, and putting my own teachery spin on it to try to make it more engaging, try to make it more applicable. And again, I enjoyed that challenge, and it was something new for me. It shortly thereafter, between choir and confirmation, it shortly thereafter lost some of their luster, with the amount of gossiping that I saw from people, just the way people acted and interacted. Again, talking about people, talking about, oh, well, why she got the solo. Oh, why that rule doesn't apply to this person. Oh, they can be in this part because they're the favorite. Like, again, cattiness is going to happen everywhere. I just wasn't expecting it as prevalent in church. When I was teaching confirmation, I worked with some amazing people who had great ideas. One of the people was named Tracy, and she did a great job of researching like the numbers and what they mean and the colors and all these different symbols and pulling it all together. She did a great job. So she eventually transitioned out, and I moved to a new role in the confirmation program. It was called Faith in Action. And it basically was a way to help the kids better understand what they believe. And I loved that role. As a part of that role, we would visit different worship spaces because it was important to me and to the confirmation group that they know, we acknowledge that they very well might not stay in that little town for the rest of their life. We wanted them to feel comfortable enough to go to a different house of worship, experience what that's like, see these different things, understand the world around them, because not everyone lives in that little town that we lived in. Not everyone is that same denomination that we were. Across the street from us was a Catholic church. And there was tensions that we heard about even as I was a child. Tensions about, they're parking in our parking lot, and they're stealing all our people. Really? Like, just all these tensions. And when we came up with this idea of going to these different worship spaces, the students were really excited. The families were supportive. Some of them not as much. When we went to the Islamic mosque, they were not necessarily thrilled. When we went to the Jehovah's Witness Kingdom Hall, nope, not really thrilled. But in general, they were supportive. And then we had other people, they tended to be older in the congregation. They were not happy at all. They were very adamant that the kids didn't need to know anything about any denomination other than theirs. They didn't need to be going anywhere else because all we're doing is encouraging them to leave. And that response felt so closed-minded to me. And it made me question, if you don't want them to know about the world around you, what are you afraid of? I didn't know it at the time, but my amazing boyfriend has this great saying of, the truth doesn't mind being questioned. And I didn't know it at the time, but all I could think about is, well, why? Why do you have such a problem with this? Why are you so concerned if this person in confirmation class gets confirmed here and then they choose, I'm better fit in the Lutheran movement, or I'm better fit in the Islamic faith, or whatever. If they're following God, which is what they preach, if they're doing these good deeds, if they are being Christ-like in the world, does it really matter what denomination they are? If they are bringing good to the world, if they are making a difference, if they are being a good person, does it matter what denomination they are? And I admittedly was a bit forward thinking, and I would push the envelopes frequently. When I was teaching the music program for the kids. I would have the kids running around the church sometimes. I would bring instruments in. I would do stomping in the service. I would encourage them to go on a mission trip, or we would go and do outreach activities. We would do these different things because I wanted the kids to feel that sense of pride in themselves, but I wanted them to know, and this was not a response just by myself, it was the whole confirmation group of teachers. We wanted to instill in the kids that there's life outside of this little town. God is outside of this little town. And wherever life takes you, we want you to find your place. And we thought we were doing a great thing. And so to have the congregation members really push back hard on that was tough. It got to the point where when I was teaching confirmation, I wouldn't go to church, me personally, because I saw the hypocrisy in the way people were talking to each other and about each other and the way they presented themselves during service. I would attend services virtually. I would try out some different services. There was such a fakeness in many of the relationships that I had been a part of since my birth that it was something I didn't realize, and it hurt. It hurt at a deep level to go from this is your home away from home, these are the people who care about you the most, to feeling like they were distant relatives. That I was only valuable if I was doing something for them. I remember having a parent or two, even a pastor, come up to me and say, well, you're not being a good role model for the kids because you don't come to church. Touche, I don't. But instead of asking why or what I was working on or what I was struggling with, it was more of that accusatory thing. And I struggled going to church. The messages didn't connect with me. It bothered me to high heaven that 95% of the service, we are praying to, talking to, worshiping Jesus. Not God. I went to a Catholic school for college. I had nuns as my teachers. And as part of that curriculum, we had to go to a religious class. And so I think I went to Religions of the World. I think that's what the name was. But this sister was floored when we were talking about God. And I said, well, we don't really bring him up during services. We talk about Jesus. We don't talk about God. That's just what it was. She was floored. And then there's the whole concept of the Trinity. And I remember teaching the Trinity to Sunday school, and the closest I could get to was explaining the Trinity like the three states of water: an ice cube, vapor, and liquid, and how God can change shapes. And I remember watching the movie The Shack and how that helped me see it slightly differently. Does it make sense? 100%? No. I read a book. It was something about Jesus in jail, or God in prison. So it was something with God or Jesus and the death row. And so there was this prisoner, and there was every night he would pass around this pack of gum, and the pack of gum never seemed to run out, even though it was all these different people that were shared. And it was supposed to tie back to the loaves and fishes story of Jesus, how Jesus was preaching on a mountain, and all these people had come and nobody wanted to leave to go and have lunch. So he asked for extras to be brought forward, and it was either 5 fish and 2 loaves, or 2 fish. I think it's 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread. And he blessed them, prayed over them, and then he dispersed them. And when they were done, they collected up the remnants, and there were like multitudes of baskets. So like certainly a miracle. But so that was that story's comparison. And it got me thinking, what if Jesus didn't do all these miracles? What if these miracles were exaggerated? What if these 5 fish and 2 loaves, or 2 fish and 5 loaves, whatever way it is, what if that's an exaggeration as well? What if all these things weren't by the same person? Now, I can tell you, people don't like those questions. Not in the Christian church. They don't like talking about Jesus and questioning that. They don't like questioning why you don't like the Trinity, why you struggle with it. But I never stopped asking questions. I felt myself growing more and more distance from the church as my doubts continued to grow, as I continued to try to seek answers. I went to Bible studies. I went to retreats. I brought kids with me to retreats. I went to retreats myself. I went to a workshop with my mom. I met with pastors individually, trying to get some basic answers. And gain insights. And I'm not gonna lie, there were sparks that I would gain occasionally, but nothing seemed to stick. It just led to more questions. And it led to more awareness. When I started seeing how much of the service is focused on Jesus, it drove me nuts. To the point where I would start in my head changing different things. I no longer prayed to Jesus because I felt like I was being disrespectful to God. I was discrediting him. I felt like asking questions was pointless at some regards because people were fake about speaking their truth. They would give half answers. They would be one person in church and you would see them in the grocery store and they would be completely different. I saw this firsthand. My parents were at the church that I was baptized at the entirety of their married life. Then they moved from our small town. And they came back a month or so later. And the way they were treated was despicable. They were treated like they were an inconvenience because, oh, why are you back? Oh, well, do you want something? Like, there was no joy. There was no personal connection. It was so not Christ-like. And so when I saw that experience for them, I certainly opened my eyes. As I was growing more distant from the church, I remember stepping back, and I wasn't going to do confirmation anymore. I wasn't doing choir anymore. I was really just trying to figure out what my next steps were. Our pastor left. We got a new interim pastor. They begged me to come on for confirmation class. Again, so I helped because, okay, I know the kids. I can do confirmation class. You don't know the kids. I can help. Absolutely, I can do this. I remember vividly being in a class, and we were talking about God, and we were talking about the Trinity, and a student asked me a question, and I was stuck. Not because I didn't want to answer her, but because what I wanted to say from my point of view was not in alignment with what the denomination's expectation was for me to say. And it was at that moment that I knew I couldn't pretend anymore. It wasn't fair for them, and it wasn't fair for me. So I needed to stop teaching confirmation class. And I did stop. And I went to church a couple more times. And I got the cold shoulder. And when I finally decided, no, it's not right. Like, I am going through the motions. I'm doing more harm than good. I need to stop. I live in a small town. And I literally was at the grocery store. And there was someone that I had known for my entire life. I sang in choir with them. I taught with them. They were at family functions. They literally saw me, did an about face, and turned and went the other way. I would see people on walks, and I would say hi to them, and they would completely ignore me. It was like I was shunned. These people that I had lived 40 years with, these people that had seen me grow up from a child, that they would turn on somebody like that. Not ask, where are you? What are you doing? Are you okay? Like, they didn't care about me as a person. I was no longer serving them a purpose. So I was done for them. That's not the God that I was taught about. That's not being Christian as I was taught. But based on their examples, my question still stood. And I knew that what was going on there was not what I wanted to be a part of. And I need to figure out what was right for me. So I started doing research. I started this channel. I started doing my own research. And I began this journey to here we are. So next time, we're going to talk about some of the things that I learned. Some of the things that, as I was seeking my own truth, my own answers, the things that I learned that confirmed that Christianity was not right for me. So, if you enjoyed today's presentation, I hope you give it a like, give it a thumbs up. I hope you subscribe to this channel. This is a big series for me. This is a very personal series for me because I was Christian for more than 40 years. And leaving what society deems as the norm is not necessarily easy. And you may be in that same boat. So I really hope you hit that subscribe button and you'll join me on this journey. Because even if you're not in this place, someone in your life maybe, and to help understand what they're going through may be helpful. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. I greatly appreciate you. I appreciate the time that you have devoted. I know this is a long one, but I really enjoyed sharing my story thus far with you, and I'm looking forward to the next one already. So until then, remember, the more we know, the more we grow. Take care.